paper copy?
I do have one, so
okay.
I'll muddle through. Doesn't want to. Well,
oh, well, yeah, just you need all the people in the boardroom to help them.
You want the power, eh?
I can't need everyone on attending virtually. I have to do it to everybody here.
Okay, we ready to go?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I would like to call this meeting of the Finance Committee for September the 6th, 2023 to order. And we have an approval in front of us. Are there any changes or addition, or would someone like to make a motion to adopt it?
We'll move.
Director Lennox, Director McCormick, any discussion on this? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. We have minutes from 2 months ago, our nice long meeting of July the 5th, 2023. Any changes or additions? Or, and if there are none, would someone like to make a motion to adopt those minutes? Director Lennox, Director Elliott, any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. Thank you, everyone. We have a delegation from Rick Shanaman, the chair, Doug Smith, representative of the Savary Island Marine Advisory Committee, SIMAC, and Chris Philpott, the fire chief of Savary Island Volunteer Fire Department, regarding the Savary Island Wharf Fire Protection 2024. So thank you for joining us. And you have 10 minutes. There will be a clock on the screen, and there will be some questions afterwards, opportunity for questions afterwards.
Sure. Hi, my name is Doug Smith. Yeah, thank you for hearing us today. I'm just going to read from some notes so I don't miss anything here. I've been on the Savary Marine Services Committee for 8 years, member of the fire department for 18. The idea of fire protection for Savary Wharf goes back many years, but was reconsidered after this year's May long weekend, when there were hundreds of young people that appeared on island, and a great number of them gathered at the wharf day and night all weekend. One evening, a group of them decided to have a campfire directly underneath the wharf approach with its wood timbers and deck during a strong northwest wind. They abandoned it. The fire was spotted and left to nearby residents to extinguish with buckets of seawater. The fire department arrived shortly afterwards to assess and report to 911 dispatch. The event was also reported to the RCMP. This close call prompted the fire department and the dock committee members to bring back the idea of wharf fire protection. We immediately resumed discussions and held an on-site meeting mid-summer. That turned into the proposal you now have. Our current method for fighting a wharf fire is from fire trucks, but there isn't near enough onboard water for a sustained firefighting response. And seawater, although it's right there, is difficult to access safely and is time-consuming to set up pumps and suction lines, and impossible if the wharf is already on fire. Our proposed system would have a single hydrant near the wharf and 10,000 gallons of gravity-fed water from 2 water tanks up the hill. It would be a massive improvement for firefighting, protecting the wharf and nearby homes that would be affected by a wharf fire. We must also consider evacuation. The wharf is only one of 3 emergency evacuation sites on Savary. It is critical that this old wood structure be better protected. We are asking for your help because our budgets are stretched, trying to keep up the cost of inflation, ongoing operations, and saving for needed capital upgrades. For example, the fire department is saving for a new fire truck, which Chief Chris Philpott can speak to. The Marine Services has a number of big projects needing to be done. Dredging costs have more than doubled due to government regulations. So there's discussion around moving the breakwater further out to resolve the ongoing dredging costs. Excuse me. And there's the West Point boat launch, which will need eventual reconstruction, which is another emergency evacuation site. SIMAC Chair Rick Shanaman can address questions on those projects. We worked on this wharf protection proposal with the intention of speaking with you before CATHET's 2024 budget and staff planning. The project design is ready. The budget is ballparked. We already have agreement and full cooperation between the fire department and Marine Services committee members. We have included the improvement district that could supply water to the tanks. Dock committee member Brian Miles is also the Improvement District Chair, and can answer questions on that. Quite a bit of work, all volunteer time, has gone into this already. We hope to get this project completed before summer 2024, when the risk of fire is greatest. Thank you. Open for questions.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Was Mr. Philpott going to address, or do you want to address some questions first and then have? It's fine. We can go around the board. Or is there questions from the board for Mr. Smith about the proposal? We have and I'll note we have a lot of details in the agenda, which was great to see. So I see Director Lennox.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, group, for your presentation today, and Rick for letting us know about it. First of all, good work on this project justification. We get a lot of presentations, delegations, and this one is very thorough in my opinion, and really hits on all of the points that you just raised and more about why you think this is important to the community. Just a couple of questions. One's actually, let's start with staff, maybe Mr. Tom's. Any historical assessments on this facility in regards to fire suppression or sprinklerization or any of the issues that have been raised?
Mr. Tom's on the call here.
I don't.
Yeah,
through the chair.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, there have been discussions on this topic for a number of years. To the level of detail that you're asking about, Director Lennox, no, not that I've been a part of.
Just a couple of follow-ups. You mentioned the Savary Shores Improvement District, and was able to recently tour that facility. It appears that infrastructure is solid and could supply the water necessary for this project. Are you confident of that?
Yes.
That's what it looked like to me. And I just wanted to make a couple of points from my experience in my other work that I've done in my life. The Coast Guard and any tugs that approach that dock for any significant event are going to be ineffectual, and firefighting won't be able to be done safely to fight any event on that structure. So I appreciate the concerns you've raised, and support the concept. Prepared to make a motion after the questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. My question is just kind of for my education. So if we're on salt water, would a pumping salt water system from the ocean not work for fire suppression? I know you don't want salt where salt doesn't belong, but a wharf is over top the ocean. So would it not be easier to not use the fresh water when you're looking at what's fire suppression on the wharf? I'm just wondering if anyone could help me with that.
Yeah, Mr. Smith, you can.
Yeah, it can be done. It's very, very difficult and time consuming. There's been a number of practices that I've attended where we've attempted to pump seawater, dropping big suction lines into the ocean. It's all tide dependent. So if you've got a low tide, you're in trouble. Even on high tide, it's hard to get the water going with the pump sometimes. Also, the pump is heavy. You've got two guys to carry it out there, take it down to the float. The complexity is great. If there's a fire going on near the wharf, you can't even get access to the water. We've also tried pumping in the past seawater from the beach, again, tide dependent. And if you know Savary, the tide goes way out. There's all kinds of problems with like getting stuff into the pump, seaweed, kelp. If you break suction, the water will just stop, and you've got to prime the pump again. So the complexity is huge. And if you ever attended a fire or fought a fire, you know that every second is valuable. Chris can speak to this more, what they've done more recently, but in my experience as deputy chief for 7 years and the training I've done, it's extremely difficult. So hopefully that answers your question. As far as salt getting to the equipment, you can rinse it out. Yeah, it's not great for longevity, but freshwater having instant access, about 50 PSI ready at a hydrant, you're about 300 feet away from the dock. You don't even need a pump. You can just hook up a hose line to that hydrant and then open the nozzle, boom, you're fighting fire.
Yeah, well, thank you. In my mind, the system would be built in, so you wouldn't be dragging it all around, and you would have the intakes built at the section of the dock that is not tide dependent, but and you would have the hoses and suppression system running, and the pumps would be non-priming types, but maybe that's not possible. I don't know. Like electric.
So quick answer on that. I raised that question probably going back 15 years ago. And I was told that it'd be a problem with mussels and barnacles getting into and around the suction line. So you have to open up the end to be able to, if you want to block it off, you have to open up that end of the suction line somehow. It's again, complexity, and we didn't cost that out. I did talk to Ralph Watts, who was the marine engineer that was in charge of the dock committee back in 2007. We spoke about this at length. Yet the call records are on file at the regional district. We did talk about a seawater sort of system like that, and nothing came of it. So
thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Hey, hi, we're running out of time. Can I say something?
Yeah. So who's this? That's
It's Chris Philpott.
Chris Philpott. Yes. Why don't you say something, and then we'll make sure all the directors
okay,
have
thank you very much.
Opportunity.
The proposed location of this hydrant is absolutely perfect, because it's right in between the last hydrant of Savary Shores, and then we pick up our tank farm on Townley. So there's an area of which is a void of a water supply, and this hydrant happens to be right there, and it's in that void, and there's some very high priced real estate in that area, and 10,000 gallons of water at 50 psi at that location is a tremendous bonus.
Great, thank you. So are there other directors? So I see Director Gisborne had his hand up, and then I'll if there's no one else who wants to speak for first time, I'll make a comment and then pass it over to Director Lennox. Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I have to thank the previous speaker, because my question was going to be like, what are the thoughts on using this water source for fire protection for neighboring structures, not just the dock? And well, he just answered that already. So
100%.
Thank you, Chris. That was my question.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to ask a question who has not spoken? And I would just like to say I want to thank you for coming to us. And I think this is a time sensitive issue. So given that we're going into budget, so I think normally we would take us longer time, but I think I'll give Director Lennox an opportunity to put his motion forward, because I think he indicated he might have one. So Director Lennox.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I think the previous points are resonate with me around having the gravity feed that you're considering and the timeliness of that, so that the firefighters don't have to spend time hooking things up and that sort of thing. So appreciate that. I could work with the corporate officer on a motion here. I'd like to I hope you'll understand the intent of my motion is to really ask staff for a report on what the feasibility of sprinklerization of the dock, well, of the suggested project. There's two phases, so we should look at what's been presented to us and go from there.
Corporate officer, do you have enough for words? Just like Director Gisborne seconding.
I'll let you put that together. After
report on the proposed project.
On the proposed project, yes.
So
Yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated.
Does the committee recommend the board refer the Savary Wharf Fire Protection 2024 project to staff for a report to be brought back to the Finance Committee?
Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's what I seconded, I think.
Okay, that's great. So we have a motion before us to refer this proposal to staff for a report. Is there any discussion on that motion? Director Gisborne?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure a lot of this information will be in the staff report. I see a lot of the advantages of having this fire protection on this dock. It also does, bring back some of my memories of that this used to be a federal dock that the regional district took on way back in the day. So I'm hoping that this staff report will also include maybe possible options, for grant funding, maybe not just community works, but also federal and provincial as well. And I think if we can maybe poke the bear over in Ottawa, because it was originally their dock, And this was it back in the 90s, I think it was, they did a lot of downloading of federal docs onto local governments, and this is one of them. So that's something I hope to see in the staff report is there any other funding to make this happen? Yeah, that's it for me. Thanks.
I agree. Is there any Director Doubt? Thanks for the envelope.
Yeah, and yeah, just trying to make it easy to see.
Sorry about that.
So, you know, fire protection, always a really great idea. The devil is in the details. So this is fire protection for the dock, and we've had discussions before about taking over other docks and got caution from the staff that once you take over a dock, it's not just the joy of having the asset, it's the joy of protecting and renewing and maintaining it for a long time. And with this, the devil is in the details. I think we have to talk about it because the delegation has been clear that all the piping and the fire hydrant would provide more fire protection for the dock, but also it would provide more fire protection for other residences in the area, which makes it a mixed benefit. And who pays for it, to my mind, is going to make a big difference in how that works out in the long term. Is the regional district, the entire regional district, going to pay for this? Or is it going to be the users on Savary Island and the people who get protection of their homes from the increased fire protection? And then we're getting a connection again with an improvement district and all the stuff we've talked about probably around the table about 3 dozen times about in improvements to improvement district facilities, and where does the lines start and where does it stop? So, you know, we're going to get a report and we'll talk about it, but I expect to see those details dealt with in the report.
Thank you, Director McCormick.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Just further to Director Doubt's comments, Texada Island has a dock that is owned and operated by the regional district, and every year taxes are collected on Texada to maintain that dock. So I would expect that it would be paid for locally within the area, just as the one, you know, in Bonanda is. So that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, Director Elliott.
Thanks. Just visited Savary not too long ago, and it became apparent to me that the main users of that dock, other than the residents, was like a commercial business, ferrying and so forth. Other facilities that are having commercial transportation operators have what's called improvement fees to help pay for that facility. And I wondered if the concept of improvement fees for the Savary Island dock for the commercial operators, which would help disperse the expenses of that dock to some of the visitors and not just the residents, might be an idea. Then anyway, it's just why I wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you. So we're asking for a report. I think a lot of the staff have heard the comments, which have been very good. I think there will be discussion on this. I think, you know, there's the project itself, and then there will be how, and, you know, it could be funded and so on. So I think right now the motion is for a report. And if I see no more hands up, I will call the question on that motion. All of those in favor? Opposed? None carried. So thank you both for, or all three, for approaching us with this. I think I really appreciated the really concise information that you gave and the concise presentation, because you got to the point. We were able to discuss it, and here we have an action. So thank you for coming to us.
Thank you.
Okay, on to unfinished business. There actually is an item of unfinished business, and that's the land acknowledgement that I neglected to state at the start of the meeting. And so I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tla'amin Nation, as well as the Coast Salish First Nations, on whose traditional territories we have the honor to live, including my home on Wai'ete, also known as Lasqueti Island. Okay, so correspondence. We have one item of correspondence that we can receive. Is there any, or that we have received? Is there any business anyone would like to arise from that? Seeing none, we skip right along to reports. So the first item 8.1, Fire Chief Association of BC, Office of the Fire Commissioner, a request for that we recommend the board endorse an application for funding for live fire training props. Okay, Director Brander and Director Lennox, is there discussion on this item? Director Lennox.
Yeah, I totally support this recommendation, and having done live fire training, I can attest to the fact that if you don't practice with real props and do it properly, when you get into the real situation, lives are at stake, our first responders. So I think this is a no-brainer. That facility is very cool. If you get a chance to go to London, check it out. It's quite a resource for our region for training, and I think even other regions will be seeing its availability. So we should be supporting that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Director Elliott.
Also support it. I'm looking forward to perhaps someone organizing a tour for us, and I'd be very happy to go on that as well.
Wednesday night at practice.
Any other discussion? So I'll just mention that I think it's great. A live tour would be great while it's in operation, but that's not so likely. But I think, I've encouraged people on Lasqueti Island and SIVFD to use it, and Mr. Toms has as well. And it's challenging because of the costs of getting volunteers up there, but it can be of use for all the fire departments. And I think it's a really useful, I don't think there's any substitute for this kind of live training, as Director Lennox pointed out. Okay, so on to the question. I will call the question. All in favor of the motion? Opposed? None carried. Thank you very much. On to the next item, the interim financial statements. I see Ms. Green, and so before I'll ask for the motion to be put, and then we'll ask if Ms. Green has comments. Would someone? Okay, Director Lennox, Director McCormick. Ms. Green, do you have any overview or comments on these, or is everything in the report? You're silent. You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair, no, I don't have any comments. I don't have any concerns with the financial statements year to date. And I have outlined, there are notes inserted throughout the financial statements that show where there's a variance that is less or more than we would expect to July 31st, 2023. But I am available if directors have any questions.
That's great, thanks. And I know that the report says we're in the range anticipated, and the notes along, identifying why certain things are apparently out of range are very helpful. So are there any questions or comments from the board, Director McCormick?
Thank you, Chair. I have two quick questions. The first one is on page 18 of the report on expenses for Shelter Point Park. And there's an item for $40,000. And I just wonder if you could refresh my memory, please, and what that is for.
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Oh, the $40,000 was for, sorry, I just have to look up one thing here.
The well?
It's the well, but I'm just going to be 2 seconds off of it, just to be certain. Yes. Yes, it is the new well for the Shelter Point Park facilities.
Okay, thank you. Chair, I have one more quick question.
Yes.
Sorry?
Oh, go ahead.
It's on page 81 of the report. Speaking of docks, it's about the Texada Island Marine Facilities. I see from this, we collect $77,384 from Texada taxpayers. But I also see under the expenditure column that we put 41,000 into reserves, and 41 is more than half of the tax dollars collected. So I'm questioning whether that amount for going into the future, I'm not questioning what's here now, but going into the future, why we would need to put more than 50% of a services budget into reserves rather than bringing down the cost of the service.
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. We put the money into reserves because when there are expenses for repairs and maintenance, they are quite costly. And so this way it allows us to have the money in reserve available for when we need to make those repairs on an ongoing basis.
Here, if I
Director
may,
McCormick?
quick follow-up, yeah. But more than 50% of the overall budget seems very excessive. And I'd like to know if we can bring down that the amount of that contribution percentage-wise to a more reasonable figure, because I think that's really unnecessary, more than 50% of the budget.
CAO, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, staff have taken note of your question, and coming through the budget deliberations, we will provide you with, I guess, the policies and procedures that we've used in the past. If such, maybe that there's a change needed, then you can certainly do that at the budget deliberation time, when you can say, this is how much we want in it. But as a quick anecdotal, I think we put that amount in based on trying to keep the requisition of the taxpayers consistent.
Right, but it's just had a major renovation, so hopefully nothing major will happen. Okay. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. And I'll just add my thoughts to it, and the CAO will correct me if I'm wrong. It seems to me this could be related to asset management. We're looking backwards with this year for this item here, but I think for the budget, more clarity could come about how, why the level is of the level it is, and then that can either be adjusted or left as is based on why that is at that level. Director Gisborne.
Well, thank you, Chair. And please correct me if I'm wrong, CAO. My understanding of docks is they tend to have very low operational costs, but have very high capital costs for maintenance and repairs or studies. And that's why such a large portion of the budget goes into reserves, because it might be every 3 or 4 years that you got to put a big expense in, rather than a year or just like a month-to-month operational cost like some of our other services. Is that understanding correct, CAO?
CAO, is that Ms. Greenan? I see her hand.
I saw Ms. Greenan's hand go up. And
Sorry, CAO. I'll let Ms. Greenan answer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do expect to have major repairs on the dock facility every few years. And I can let the Manager of Asset Management speak after. But I just wanted to give you, for an example, in 2022, we had $259,000 saved up in the reserve. And then we spent almost 200,000 of that on the repairs. We spent 185,457 in 2022. And then in 2024, we will have a major inspection again, and then we'll find out when we need more repairs. So at that point, we will have 129,000 built up in the reserve. So we'll need to probably, the way that we are planning our reserve contributions, we will have $200,000 saved up by the end of 2027. So that would mean that if we had a major repair between now and 2027, we wouldn't have enough money to fund it. And we can't, the regional district cannot borrow for repairs and maintenance. You can only borrow for a capital purpose or for revenue anticipation. So it puts us in a little bit of a bind if we don't have the funding available to make those repairs.
Thank you. And I see Mr. Schwab's video came up. Maybe, do you have anything to add to that explanation?
I can, through the chair. Ms. Greenan's assessment and the numbers are fairly consistent with what we've seen historically. I think the asset consumption or sort of the value that we would like to put away every year is right around $37,000 to $40,000 a year. Our expectation would be that within 5 to 10 years, the cost of sort of replacement and repair would be somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000, and that's where that number would come from.
Thank you. Okay, so I see Director Lennox.
Yeah, just further to the point you're making, Ms. Green, and is this a common approach? We're talking about marine facilities today. It seems like it's the theme. That is there a percentage that you look at all marine facilities because of this issue and that kind of periodic heavy hit that we take, or is it case by case?
Well, I'll pass it to Ms. Green in a moment, but I can answer a bit of this, and so can Mr. Schwab, which is our asset management policy. So I think it's not about marine facilities; it's about replacement time and life cycles, and so dividing the replacement cost down the road by the years, and then you get a number that for the asset management side. So you're paying a little bit every year as opposed to having some big chunk, hit in when you do need a big replacement. But Ms. Greenan may have more clarity than I do.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you explained it well. That's what we do. We look at each facility in isolation. So when the asset management department makes the asset management plans or state of asset reports, they do look at everything that needs to be done to keep that asset operational and in good condition. So we have a mix of putting funds aside for reserves, and then potentially if it was an upgrade or a replacement, there might be an element of borrowing as well. But we do need to set funds aside strictly for repairs and maintenance. That those cannot be borrowed.
Great. So does that answer your question, Mr. Director Lennox?
Thank you.
Okay, so do we have any other questions on the motion before us, which is to receive these statements? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, none carried. Okay, we're on to 8.3, the 2024 Revenue Anticipation Borrowing Bylaw. And I'll just note that this is a standard procedure for this time of year to cover spending prior to the QRD receiving property tax requisitions.
So moved.
Director Gisborne, Director Lennox, is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None carried. Okay. Permissive tax exemption 8.4. So there's a request the motion before us is about a permissive tax exemption request from the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 232 on Texada Island.
So moved.
Okay, moved and seconded by Director McCormick, seconded by Director Lennox. Is there discussion on this, Director McCormick?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say thank you very much to staff for bringing this recommendation forward. There's been a long history with this group and this organization. So I'm very happy to see the recommendation. And I just want to say thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Is there any other discussion? Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I know I've talked about permissive tax exemptions in the past. Myself, I've always had a bit of an issue with how regional districts do permissive tax exemptions, because unlike in a municipality where everyone pays, and then when you get permissive tax exemption, it's just that entity isn't paying for everything. At a regional district, it's the other, it's the rest of the services that are then making up the difference. So this one I'm actually fine with supporting, because it's predominantly over on Texada. Most of the services there are isolated on Texada, as well as the benefit is predominantly on Texada. One of the challenges with tax exemption is when we take a look at, was it Myrtle Point Golf Club? You get issues then with the fire department and who's benefiting, and it can really muddle the waters, make it about as thick as my coffee. But for this case over on Texada, I'm fine with it. I support it. Myself, I would lean a little bit more towards supporting like a grant from, say, General Grant and Aid. That's not what we're discussing today, just the tax exemption. So I will support this resolution. But that being said, when more tax exemption requests come forward, I want us to make sure that we're looking at it through the appropriate lenses and which services are being affected. So yeah, I'm happy to support them. They're a great organization. That's it for me.
Further? Okay, thank you, Director Gisborne. Is there any other discussion item? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Passes. None opposed. Okay, so item 8.5, Director's Remuneration and Expenses Amendment Bylaw number 586, and this is some changes arising from our Code of Conduct review. Director Gisborne, is there a seconder for this? Director Lennox. So thank you. I think I saw your glasses. I wasn't sure. Okay, so is there discussion on the motion that's on the table here? Okay, Director McCormick.
Yep, thank you. I have a quick question regarding asset disposal. which is in here on pages 28.
I think that's the next motion, Director McCormick. We're on the.
Sorry, I apologize.
That's
I'm ahead
okay.
of myself.
That's okay. Yeah. So are we? Okay, any other discussion on the remuneration changes? Okay. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None carried. Okay. Now we're on to the delegation of purchasing authority bylaw, procurement policy, and asset disposal policy. Someone like to make a motion? Director McCormick, is there a seconder for this? Director Lennox? Oh, Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm sorry for getting that confused. I'm looking at page 28 of the report, and the policy is the asset disposal policy. And my question pertains to the last line on that page where it says any proceeds from the disposal of an asset must be deposited to the service. But what happens if a service ceases to exist in a hypothetical situation where, say, the airport on Texada closed down? Taxpayers would not contribute to a service because there would not be a service, yet the regional district still owns the property. So what happens in that situation if there's no service to deposit money into?
Very good question. And Ms. Greenan, could you help us about with, when a service is terminated and what happens to its assets?
Thank you, Chair. I think we would have to look at that individual case because, for example, when we were closing down the Lasqueti Island Waste Management Service, what we did was we used up all of the money that was in the reserves for their closure plan, and then they amalgamated with the Regional Waste Management Service. So then, so effectively, all of those assets got transferred to the Regional Waste Management Service when that service ceased to be operational. So I would think if we decided to close down a service, we would look at the assets that were available in that service at that point, and then make some decisions around whether we were going to dispose of those assets or transfer them to a different service, et cetera. I don't think we would just leave the assets sitting. So I think it would be on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe the Local Government Act almost certainly has something related to when a service is terminated, as opposed to this policy. I agree with your question, because this policy seems to be more about disposing asset while the service continues, as opposed to a wrapping up process. Director Gisborne?
No, thank you. I'm just looking at Delegation of Purchasing Authority Bylaw 589 on page 7 of the staff report. And it says number 1, bylaw number 454, cited as Lasqueti Regional District Delegation of Purchasing Authority Bylaw 454 and all amendments thereto is hereby repealed. When it comes to this committee making a decision, one of the things that I've really appreciated in the past is where we get a bylaw or a proposed change, and we also have a copy of what it's being changed from. And I've seen, I think it was in the planning department where we actually had like lines crossed out and ads and things like that. So I've actually found it kind of difficult in my head to understand the differences between the current existing policy and the new policy that's being proposed. I would like to see, kind of the two side by side and where we are and then where we're trying to go, so that I can better wrap my head around it. And for some changes, I'm okay to go for without that extra information, but Delegation of Purchasing Authority Bylaw, that's one that anytime I hear that, and I know our staff is great, we've got an incredible manager of financial services and our CAO is on the ball. But last term I heard about, what was it, the Thompson-Nicola Regional District, which had all kinds of issues, and they had a forensic audit, and it came back as, the board wasn't like paying attention to how the finances were being handled. And I always see that as like a little risk in the back of my head. And we got to make sure as a board and understand that we are a continuous body, that we adopt a policy and next election we might all be gone, but that policy will stay. We can have our great staff, our great CIO right now, but they might not be here in so many years, but that policy would still be in place. So I'm wondering, is there a time sensitivity with this proposed bylaw? And if there isn't an impetus on time here, then maybe we can have it brought back in October with, you know, that extra information about, you know, our existing policy and kind of where we are and where we're going. And maybe that's just my failure because I'm a little sleepy and I haven't finished my coffee. So,
so Ms. Green, I guess the question is there a time sensitivity to this if it was delayed by a month?
Thank you, Chair. No, there's no time sensitivity with delaying it for a month. I just wanted to mention this policy is much more robust than our former Delegation of Purchasing Authority bylaw. So we've addressed quite a few things in this policy that were not addressed in the former policy. So to make the comparison, it's quite a radical change.
Okay. And
Director Gisborne.
Okay, thank you. And you know, that's what I was getting by going through the staff report and the policy is it's got some really good changes in it. But it is quite a drastic change from what we currently have. And you know, in my mind, I'm still trying to wrap my head around all those changes and also really narrow down what risks that we as a board need to kind of understand. So I would like to hear from the rest of the committee, and if there is a desire to postpone this and we can get the existing policy on the agenda and kind of hash that out a little bit more in detail. But
thank you, Director Lennox.
I would like to add that the way the Director Gisborne described having those, you know, the strike throughs, that's easier for me as well to keep track of, and there are, you know, jumping back and forth. I get confused easy enough as it is, but so if there isn't a time urgency, if there's a way to sort of show that correlation and in future reports, I'm good with that. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion, Director Dowd? And then
yeah,
Director
I just want to add my voice to the fact that I think taking a little more time to consider it is important, and I think it really aids in the ability of directors to go through and understand what they're doing. We have side-by-side or red line documents that we can go through to do it. Delaying it means we have more time to go through and do that between meetings, and that's okay, but I really don't like delaying things, but having all the information so we actually know what we're approving before we approve it is probably a good idea. And you know, it's challenging sometimes to find all the old reports and the old policies to try to match it up and compare.
Thank you, Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I'll support the delay, and I think it is nice to have a summary of the changes. Can be done in a variety of different ways. The strikeout method is fine. I even like someone to present it and tell me what they are verbally. That works for me too, rather than having me try to read and notice what's the important thing. If someone says, hey, this is important, pay attention to this, that also works for me. So I like a variety of ways for us to, as a group, hear what the changes are and discuss them. And I would support a delay if we could bring this back and talk about it again. That would work for me too.
Thank you. And I'll speak. I also don't have a problem with the delay. I think postponing it, and I just like to suggest the wording of it, make clear what we're asking. It's not just passing this and having it, you know, come back up as it is. If we're wanting additional information, and I'll note on, you know, a lot of the changes are very good, and I really appreciate the work that's put into this. And the staff report in the discussion has, you know, 14 pointed points that outline what was actually changed. So I'll note that. And I think the motion should at least request the old policy, which would be good. And I'll just have a question for Ms. Green, and because my understanding is that the changes are dramatic enough between the two policies. I mean, I don't know for the bylaw. The bylaw is more like a cover sheet than it's the policy. That the changes are dramatic enough that a strikeout red line kind of document might be really messy. So I'm not sure if that's feasible, or whether it's changed that, whether the changes are small enough that having a kind of change report would be okay, or whether it's so big that it's better just to put the old policy there and we just have to flip back and forth. Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think if you provide a motion to provide a report on the changes, then staff can figure out the best way to present that. That'll make it clear.
That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So, okay, Director Lennox, move that. Director McCormick. So we'll wait for the corporate officer to get.
Sorry, everybody. Interrupt Chair.
So I think is the wording of your motion, Mr. Director Lennox, to refer this back to staff for a report on the changes between the old policy and the proposed policy, and bring it to the next Finance Committee meeting. October 1st.
That's the intent.
Something to that effect.
With inclusion of bylaw 454.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll let the corporate officer catch up to us, because it's easy to say yes, that.
I'm voting in favor.
We're not there yet, Cindy. Calm down.
I just wanted to be funny like everyone else.
You good with the words there, corporate officer?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, we have a mover, we have a seconder. Is there discussion on this motion, which is to refer it to staff for a report and bring it back to the Finance Committee meeting? Director Dowd.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask to have the existing delegation and purchasing authority bylaw forwarded to me and the other members of the board before the next meeting.
Yeah, I think it's that would help have both of them, the policies and the bylaws. Okay, is there any further discussion on this motion? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None carried. Okay, so we've passed it back to staff, and I think it's good. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. Just one more question. Quick one, I think. Item 6.2, supplier code of conduct. I was just curious when, at what point would the supplier be made aware of the code of conduct? Is it like past a certain financial level or something like that, or?
Ms. Greenan, can you enlighten us on how that's implemented?
Thank you, Chair. The code of conduct would come in as we were working with the suppliers. So if we were working with the vendor and then found out that they weren't meeting our policies, then it would be addressed then. So it would be after the contract has already been awarded. This would be, and then of course, reviewing the supplier's conduct when reviewing new proposals.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, anything else? We can move on to new business. And this is my motion. I'll make it. So the amendments to the financial assistance policy. So I'll move the motion that's before us, and then if I get a seconder, I'll explain. Okay, Director Brander. And so the purpose of this motion is to request a staff report to help us review and possibly revise our financial assistance policy and procedures. I have attempted to consolidate areas for which improvements were suggested during our recent and extensive discussions on the first financial assistance intake. The 6 sub-items are topics for the staff report to potentially improve equity, efficiency, flexibility, and certainty. These are not recommendations for specific changes at this time, and so I will keep my rationale brief. The first item relates to the possibility of simplifying things to remove barriers to reaching agreement. We have sometimes agreed that we want to support an applicant, but disagreed on appropriate funding sources in terms of applicability and equity between areas that pay and areas that benefit. The second item relates to the possibility and pros and cons of establishing a formal service for general grants and aid. At present, our ability to provide general grants and aid is enabled by the Local Government Act without a standalone service. But this comes with some limitations that staff can help us to better understand. The third item relates to consideration of a policy objective to regionally balance the benefits of the general grants and aid service as a whole and not by individual projects. This could improve flexibility, equity, and efficiency by providing some guidance on how we assess the benefits of grants. The fourth point relates to the possibility of receiving a summary of grants funded over recent years with a general allocation of benefits to each area. This might be similar to the summaries we have received on the Community Works Fund in the past. Such information could help us contextualize the current applications and would maintain flexibility of our grant process while providing guidance to ensure the benefit is shared equitably. The fifth item relates to groups that request funds each year for their operations. When those funds are significant and when the board considers the applicant to be providing an important beneficial service to regional well-being, it may make sense to have a process to consider multi-year arrangements to improve certainty and reduce workload for both the QRD and the applicant. And the last item relates to consideration of a single intake per year. During the first intake, we sometimes struggle with the appropriate level of funds to reserve for the second intake, which sometimes leads to inefficient allocation. Most granting agencies of which I'm aware have a single intake for a given amount of funding. To implement this may require some transition support for groups that apply in the second intake, but could improve our efficiency and balance by considering all applications at one time. I'll leave it there and open it up. Director Gisborne, then Director McCormick.
I think Director McCormick was a little bit.
Oh, Director McCormick, then Director Gisborne. Director McCormick?
Oh, no, he's kicking it back to me. Okay, thanks, Director McCormick. I would just like to thank Director Falls for this motion. Over the last several years, there have been issues around how we do our grants and aid. June and July's Finance Committee meetings, I think, can attest to some of the challenges that we've been having around our table and to determining what hole the peg fits into. The first one, Economic Development Services and the Electoral Area Grant and Aid Service, is one of those things that I kind of feel I'm sometimes smashing my head on, because Area A, Area C, and Area D participate in economic development, and Area B does not participate in the service. However, Area B always cops up the money from our Electoral Area Grant and Aid to fund the initiative. And quite often I'll say, well, what's the point of the Economic Development Service then? Because Area B can participate without being a part of it, which I know sounds odd for regional districts. That first line, I think, really will help us kind of clarify and understand, because when we're giving out money, yes, there's social benefit, yes, there's economic benefit, and it's challenging for us around this table to kind of go, well, does it have a social benefit or an economic benefit? But when you ask any of these organizations, they always say, well, it has both. Like, we provide a community benefit. And really then when it comes back to the taxpayers, they're asking, well, who pays for what? And so having it from individual electoral areas or the general grant and aid, if it has a regional benefit, I think will really streamline the process. And, you know, there's a whole bunch of other good parts in here that Director Fall has outlined. But the other one at the very end, changing to a single grant intake per year rather than 2 intakes per year. You know, sometimes we hand out a lot of the money from, say, general grant and aid in the first intake, and then someone goes, well, I was thinking about applying, but, you know, there's nothing left. So I absolutely love it. We're going to be getting a report. So I'm just saying, when I read this resolution this last weekend on the agenda, I'd just like to thank Director Fall, because it made my day. I had a great, the rest of my day was just golden. So thank you, Director Fall.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. And also thank you for bringing this forward. I'm not happy with the way our grant process works. I've not been happy with the shifting of economic development into electoral areas and the fuzzing of the line. In fact, I wonder, and I have to question whether we actually have a social planning service or an economic development service, or if they're just funding bodies for money to pass through, because we don't seem to do anything anymore in those two areas. So frankly, if we put it all into general grants and aid, I think that would make a lot of sense and would ease a lot of my discomfort with the current process. The one aspect of your recommendations, Director Fall, that I don't support, however, is the last one, and that's changing to a single intake, because you don't always know in early March if your event, say, is going to take place in the fall. You don't necessarily know what the cost will be or all of the budget particulars that are important to put in your application. So I really do support having the two intakes. I realize it's first come, first serve. So if you're not there for the first one, you take your chances on the second one. And, you know, I think people are okay with that. We understand first come, first serve. But I do believe there still needs to be two intakes to give all community groups access to funding, not just the ones that are really organized in January and February. So thank you. Thank you very much. And I hope this is approved. I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate the time you put in on this. I think there's a lot of good ideas here. And I just want to remind everybody that the motion is just about the report. It's not about debating the individual items that are discussed in the motion. So I am supportive of it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Director Elliott, and then Director Dowd. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Andrew, for making this motion. It's really well thought out. It looks like you've included a lot of the things that we've been wrestling with. I look forward to the debate that comes out of this report. I wouldn't mind also adding a section on having a policy for eligibility. We are always struggling with projects that maybe don't fit a grant at all from the regional district because they belong in projects that would be normally covered by tax pay, like you're supposed to tax for that service, or it should be a separate service, or it's something that really ought to be the provincial government's bailiwick, or people are maybe delivering services from the provincial government by contract and are also delivering services through a non-profit style stuff, and there should be some delineation between that. So maybe a section around eligibility so that people are not applying for the wrong things, or we have a way to screen out things like that. That's what I would add.
Thank you. Director Dowd.
Yeah, and I think reviewing the grant process is a really good idea. Frankly, I would be way happier with the resolution if it was very, very much more simple. And that it said that the board was requesting staff to produce a report regarding changes to the QRD financial assistance project process, rather than a very detailed list of things that we're instructing staff to bring a report on. Because I think there's more things that have to be discussed. I agree completely with Director McCormick when she says that the world has become blurry, if I'm paraphrasing what she says, particularly watching the debate over the grants this year, when the board virtually agreed that we could move anything from one grant application stream to another to make the math work out at the end of the day. That the social services and economic development services and grants and aid could be interchangeable if you thought of them in a wide enough perspective. If we're going to do that, if the board says we can move things from one definition to the other, I think the problem is not, necessarily on the list of things that are here. It's simply that the definitions don't make sense. Maybe we should start from the beginning at the definitions of what the grants are for. And are they clearly for something different than the other grants are for? We're going to have 3 services. Each one should be for something different, not the kind of thing that you could slot every application into whichever one you think has enough money for it. And we're entering a budget process, so, you know, we need to talk about the electoral areas, and the city representatives need to talk about the appetite of taxpayers to put money into these granting things, because that's what determines how much money is left for those grants when we come to allocate them. So I would like to have a wide-ranging look at the granting process, make sure we've got crystal clear definitions, and that should help with all of the other concerns that are coming in there. But I don't want to limit, you know, the inquiry into just a few. And, you know, I just would say, I think the city needs to go through its grant processes, because we have had delegations come and say they don't know what time of year. They said there's too many grant intakes. You don't know what time of year to apply for a grant to make sure they get the application in on time and they don't miss the opportunity. So there's calls for other places to have a way simpler process of single application, a one-time granting process. That if we're trying to save money for somebody in the fall, we can do it, but we can do it in one intake. But generally, I'd like to see a simpler motion that simply asks for a report reviewing the potential changes.
Director Lennox.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I understand Director Dout's concerns here. I think we could, you know, you mentioned this at the beginning of your explanation about the recommendation, that it wasn't a fulsome list. It just included the points that were raised in a lot of our discussion. So I really appreciate you including those. I think we could accomplish this by just putting the word including, including the word including. I don't know how you want to, but that would accomplish touching on these, but allow staff to explore every option.
Okay, hearing that, I'll propose an amendment to my own motion, and that is to strike the word following, so and add the word at the end, including. So it would read that the board requests staff to produce a report regarding potential, so remove the following, regarding potential changes to the QRD financial process, comma, including.
Second.
And, okay, do we have a second? So that would actually, and if I may speak on it, so that would accommodate the concern raised by Director Elliott, that staff hear us and there'll be other issues. And if staff, I also expect, would have items that they believe are problematic or could be made more efficient. So that doesn't exclude that. It makes it an inclusive or non-exclusive list. But I do think having those points is good to help give staff some direction of where, you know, some of the things that we would want in there. So does someone, Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is necessarily speaking to the amendment or the main motion. I do support the inclusion. But I have heard from Directors McCormick and Dout about the two intakes and the concern on that. And I know this is just a motion to ask for a report from staff. And I do like having these points on here and having it as, you know, we to include these, because if we just ask the staff for a very broad thing, you know, we could have a 300-page staff report and it still might not cover the issues that we around the table find important. So I think this is really good that the committee is discussing these issues so that we can give a very pointed request to our staff. When it comes to the single or two intakes a year, and I hope this is found in the staff report, is myself, I would like to see one deadline for intake, but to also let people know that, you know, if there's extenuating circumstances and you put it in after the deadline, we still may consider it, but it is a first come, first serve, so that if those that have been, you know, applied by the deadline and then there's nothing left, well, there's nothing left. But if we still have some left and people put it at a grant later on because, oh, there's some event going on, then I think that's something that could be in the staff report and we could work with in the future. What that intake date should be, because right now I believe it's the end of March or April 1st, March 31st, I think. One of the concerns I have with how we've been doing our grants is we pass our budget at the end of March and then we find out who's asking for what. I would really like to see that deadline moved up. So that way, when we start going through our budget process, we actually get a pretty good ballpark from what's being asked. So I think end of February might be a little bit too short for getting that information back from staff. I've seen even some areas where they do it at like asking at the end of December or even the end of November. So that's just my thoughts. That's all my points. And now I'm going to stop talking and hand it back to you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. And I just want to point out, we're only talking about the amendment for now, and I appreciate the desire to go into the details of what, but it's the amendment and then the motion, which is asking for a staff report. So I saw Director Elliott's hand up. Is this for the amendment or for the main motion?
I was speaking to the amendment, and I wonder
if
including but not limited to might be a little more clear, just because it is.
That's fine. Friendly amendment. We can have that. So striking the word "the following" and adding "including but not limited to," and that would make it clear. Okay. Any further discussion on that amendment to make it inclusive? Okay. Seeing none, I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? None carried. We're back to the main motion, which is to ask for a staff report regarding potential changes to the financial assistance process, including but not limited to these 6 items, and it may include other things, especially items that staff have heard us talk about and items that staff may have of their own that seem problematic or worthy of discussion. And we will have healthy, vigorous debate, I'm quite sure, on each one of these, and they may lead to some changes, not all the changes that we all want individually, but I look forward to seeing that. And I guess the only concern I have is that this could be a fair amount of work for staff. So I hope it's not too much, but then, you know, the amount of time we spend on our financial assistance process is pretty heavy. So is there any other discussion on the item on the main motion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None carries. Thank you. I'm glad it was unanimous. We can move forward and talk about this. So we have a question period. Is there anyone in the room, the reporter on the line to Mr. Galinsky? Are you there? Would you have any questions?
I am, Chair. Yes, thank you very much. With regard to the just concluded discussion on financial assistance, I'm just trying to differentiate between general grants and aid and local grants and aid. I assume that the general grants and aid are contributed to by the city and all of the electoral districts, and the local grants and aids are come from the individual electoral districts. Am I correct in that?
That is correct, but I'll pass it over to Ms. Greenan for a precise answer.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair. Yes, the general grants and aid are funded by the City of Paul River, a portion of Sechelt Indian Government District, and all 5 electoral areas. And then the individual grants and aid, what you're referring to as the local grants and aid, are funded by each individual electoral area.
I thank the manager for that particular response. I'm wondering how much money is given out annually in grants and aid by the Cathet Regional District? Chair.
Ms. Greenan, do you know the answer to that question?
Thank you, Chair. If I just have a minute, I can let you know how much was given out in 2023. So in 2023, the board awarded $96,000 of general grants and aid, and approximately $66,000 from electoral area grants and aids, A, B, C, D, and E. 33,332 from economic development, and 65,666 from social planning.
Chair, I thank the manager for the detailed breakdown. That was more comprehensive than I was expecting. My last question, Chair, is with regard to the grant intakes. Is there any particular formula that's applied to cut off grant intake 1 to make sure that there's enough for grant intake 2, or is it sort of done on an ad hoc basis?
I'll also pass that to Ms. Green, but I'd say from my perspective, it's done on an ad hoc basis. We talk about it and we try to balance it, and it's very difficult. And that would be one option that I could envision if we kept a second intake, would be to have a minimum amount we leave and just earmark it. But Ms. Greenan can again give a more precise answer.
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair, it is ad hoc. We don't have a certain formula that we leave for the second intake.
I thank the manager for the response. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to ask questions.
You're most welcome. Okay, I don't think there's anyone else there to ask questions, so we'll go on to the in-camera. There's a motion to go into a closed session. Would someone like to read it? Director Elliott?
Thank you. I move that the committee move in camera and that the meeting be closed to the public on the grounds that the subject matter to be considered relates to matters covered by the community charter under sections 91E, the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements. If the committee considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the regional district, and N, the consideration of whether a committee meeting should be closed under a provision of this subsection or subsection 2.
Is there a seconder for that? Director Lennox, call the question. All those in favor? Okay, opposed? None. So we're going in camera. Do we need a couple-minute break? I think we do. Director Lennox isn't even waiting.
now since it.
Thank you, Chair. We're back in open session. Oh, just 1 second. Maybe we're not. Are we, Carrie?
We've got everybody in.
Is Roger ready?
There. Roger is in on my screen.
Yeah. Back in session, Chair.
Back in session.
Okay, we're back in open session from our in-camera session, and this Finance Committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.